The desert has a way of playing tricks on you. The heat, the silence, the sheer emptiness of it all. It can make you see things, hear things that aren't really there. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. My name is Alex, and my story begins with what was supposed to be a simple camping trip to Utah with my friend Mark. We were headed for a secluded spot known to locals as Coyote Bend, a place famous for its stunning sunsets and eerie quiet. We'd been planning it for months, a much-needed escape from the city. The first day was perfect. We set up our tent, explored the dusty trails, and as dusk settled, we built a crackling campfire. The stars were incredible out there, a brilliant blanket thrown across the black sky. It felt like we were the only two people on Earth. That first night, the silence was broken. It was a sound I'd never heard before, a strange, guttural chattering that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. It wasn't a coyote, and it wasn't a bird. Mark and I exchanged nervous glances across the fire. "What was that?" he whispered. I shrugged, trying to appear braver than I felt, probably just a weird animal. We were in its territory, after all. The sound eventually faded, and we chalked it up to desert weirdness, finally drifting off to an uneasy sleep. The next day, things started to get stranger. We went for a long hike, and I noticed something odd. There were tracks near our campsite, but they didn't make sense. They looked like large canine prints, but they were scattered in a way that suggested something was walking on two legs, not four. And then there were the whispers, faint at first, like the wind carrying distant voices. We'd stop, listen, and hear nothing but the breeze. "Did you hear that?" Mark would ask, and I'd nod, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. By the second night, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We sat by the fire, our backs to each other, scanning the darkness that pressed in on all sides. The chattering sound returned, closer this time. It was accompanied by a low whistle, a tune that was almost human but disturbingly off-key. It sounded like someone was trying to mimic a song they'd only heard once. We zipped ourselves into the tent early, a flimsy nylon wall against a vast, unnerving dark. The whistling continued, circling our tent. It would stop, then start again from a different direction, as if whatever was out there was testing us, telling wheat to us. I could hear Mark's ragged breathing next to me, his fear mirroring my own. Sleep was impossible. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. Sometime after midnight, the whistling stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Then, a new sound began. Scratching. A slow, deliberate scraping against the side of our tent, right next to my head. It wasn't an animal's claw. It sounded like a long fingernail being dragged across the fabric. Scrape, pause. Scrape. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I was too terrified to move. Too terrified to even breathe. Suddenly, a voice whispered right outside the tent. A dry, raspy voice that chilled me to the bone. "Let me in." It wasn't a question. It was a quiet, patient command. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. Mark was frozen beside me, his eyes wide with terror in the dim moonlight filtering through the tent. The voice spoke again, but this time it was different. It was my mother's voice. "Alex, honey, it's cold out here. Please, let me in." My blood ran cold. My mother was hundreds of miles away. It knew her voice. It was mimicking her perfectly, down to the gentle, concerned tone she used when I was sick as a kid. How? How could it know that? Then it changed again, this time to Mark's girlfriend's voice, begging him to open the zipper. Mark started to sob quietly, shaking his head in disbelief. This thing, this creature, was prying into our minds, using our loved ones against us. The scratching became more frantic, more aggressive, and the fabric of the tent began to strain. We could see a long, thin shadow pressing against the wall, the shape of a distorted, unnaturally long finger. That was it. We couldn't stay. In a moment of pure, instinctual panic, I grabbed the heavy flashlight by my side. On 3, I hissed at Mark. "We run for the truck. Don't look back. No matter what you hear, don't look back." He nodded, wiping tears from his face. 1, 2, 3. I ripped open the tent zipper and we burst out into the night. We didn't dare look at what was behind us. We just ran. The air was filled with a horrific shriek, a sound of pure rage and frustration that was a blend of a human scream and an animal-esque cry. It was a sound that will be burned into my memory forever. I could hear it crashing through the brush behind us, keeping pace with terrifying ease. Its footsteps weren't human. They were heavy, yet agile, a thudding gait that was both animal and bipedal. The truck was about 50 yards away, a silver beacon in the moonlight. It felt like miles. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the terror was a powerful fuel. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. I heard a low growl right behind me, felt a gust of hot, foul-smelling breath on my neck. I didn't turn. I just twisted the key, threw the door open, and scrambled inside, with Mark tumbling in right after me. I slammed the door and locked it just as a heavy body slammed against the side of the truck, rocking the whole vehicle. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I didn't bother with the headlights. I just stomped on the gas, peeling out of our campsite and careening down the dirt road in the rearview mirror, caught for just a second in the red glow of the taillights. I saw it. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs long and jointed at unnatural angles. It stood on 2 legs, but its form was fluid, shifting, not quite solid. Its head was turned toward us, and even from that distance, I could see 2 points of pale, glowing light where its eyes should have been. They weren't reflecting light. They were producing it. They were filled with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. We drove through the night, not stopping until the sun came up and we hit the main highway, surrounded by the comforting sight of other cars. We left everything behind. Our tent, our gear, all of it. None of it mattered. We drove straight back to the city, the silence in the truck thick with unspoken horror. We never talked about what happened. What could we say? Who would believe us? But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The desert doesn't just play tricks on your mind. Sometimes, the things you see in the darkness are real, and they're watching. They're listening, and they're waiting for you to let your guard down. I've never been camping since, and I don't think I ever will again. Some places are best left alone, and the secrets they hold are best left undiscovered. The memory of that voice, those glowing eyes, is a constant reminder that we are not always at the top of the food chain. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay safe out there, and if you ever hear a familiar voice calling to you from the dark, don't answer. Used to run. The hiss of the old radiator in my dorm room was usually a comfort, a familiar white noise against the late-night silence of the university campus. But tonight, it felt like the slow, sinister exhale of something waiting just outside my door. It all started a week ago, in the university mess hall. It's a huge, cavernous place, always echoing with the clatter of trays and the chatter of 1,000 students. But lately, a different sound had crept in, a sound that didn't belong. It was during the late dinner rush. I was grabbing a tray, my mind on a calculus exam, when I heard it. A faint clicking, like nails on linoleum, cutting through the usual din. I looked around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just tired students shoveling down mystery meat and limp salad. I dismissed it. Nerves, I told myself. Too much caffeine, not enough sleep. The next day, it happened again. This time, the clicking was closer. I was in line for pasta, and the sound was coming from just behind me. I glanced over my shoulder. There was a guy there, new to me, tall and unnaturally gaunt. His eyes were what got me. They were dark, almost black, and they seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He was staring at the back of my head with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. He wasn't holding a tray. He was just standing there, watching. When I turned back, the clicking stopped. Things got weirder. Food started going missing from the kitchen, but not the usual stuff students would steal. We're talking about huge quantities of raw meat. The cooks were baffled, blaming faulty inventory records. Then, One of the janitors, a sweet old man named Arthur, quit without notice. He'd worked at the university for 30 years. His only explanation, whispered to a colleague, was that he saw something wearing the cookie's skin late one night near the walk-in freezers. Everyone laughed it off as a crazy rumor. I wasn't laughing. The clicking became a nightly occurrence. It would follow me around the mess hall, a persistent, unnerving metronome to my meals. I started eating faster, my eyes darting around, always looking for the gaunt man. Sometimes I'd see him, sometimes I wouldn't, but I could always feel him. That cold, predatory gaze. I started taking my food to go, eating in the sterile quiet of my room, but I couldn't escape the feeling of being hunted. One evening, I forgot my textbook in the mess hall. It was late, almost closing time. I hesitated at the entrance. The hall was nearly empty, bathed in the dim, humming glow of the fluorescent lights. The air was cold, heavy. Against my better judgment, I went in. My book was right where I left it, on a table near the back. As I grabbed it, I heard the click. Not from behind me this time, but from the kitchen. Clink, clink, clink. Slow, deliberate. My heart hammered against my ribs. Curiosity, that stupid, fatal human trait, got the better of me. The swinging doors to the kitchen were propped open. I crept closer, peering through the gap. The kitchen was dark, except for the pale light from the open freezer door. And there, in the middle of the floor, was a shape. It was crouched over something, its back to me. It was long and emaciated, its limbs bent at angles that weren't quite right. It was covered in patchy, dark fur, and its skin seemed loose, ill-fitting. The clicking sound was coming from its long, dirty claws as they scraped against the tiled floor. It was gnawing on a huge side of raw beef, tearing at it with stained, pointed teeth. The sound of wet, tearing and snapping bone filled the silence. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't an animal. It was a nightmare. As I watched, frozen in terror, it slowly, deliberately, began to stand. Its joints popped and cracked, and it unfolded itself, rising to a height that seemed impossible. It was easily over 7 feet tall. And then it turned its head. The movement was jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on a string. It wasn't the face of the gaunt man. It was the face of Arthur, the old janitor. But it was wrong. The skin was stretched too tight over the cheekbones. The eyes were hollowed-out pits of blackness, and the mouth was frozen in a silent scream. It was a mask, a horrifying, stolen mask. Our eye smith, or rather, my eyes met the empty sockets in that horrifying puppet face. It didn't react at first. It just stared, its head cocked to one side, and then a low growl rumbled from its chest, a sound that vibrated through the floor and up my spine. It took a step towards me. Click. Another step. Click. It was coming for me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My lungs were I just turned and ran. I burst through the mess hall doors and didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I could hear the doors swinging wildly behind me, and for a terrifying second, I thought I heard that awful clicking on the pavement behind me. Fast and frantic, I sprinted across the quad, my breath tearing from my throat, not daring to slow down until I was safely behind the locked door of my dorm building. I haven't been back to the mess hall. I live on protein bars and vending machine snacks now. I've lost weight. I barely sleep. Every night, I push my desk against my door, because sometimes, late at night, when the campus is silent and the old radiator is hissing, I hear it, faintly, from the hallway outside my room. A slow, deliberate sound. Click, click, click. It knows where I live, and it's waiting. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever had a strange encounter on your campus, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Stay safe out there.
The rustling in the bushes wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't the sound of a squirrel or a bird. It was heavy, deliberate. I was on a late-night hike just on the outskirts of Austin, chasing the last bit of twilight. That's when I saw it. Just for a second, a tall, gaunt figure, half hidden by the dense foliage. Its limbs were too long, its posture all wrong. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. And then it was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the sudden silence of the woods. I tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, a deer. But the image was seared into my mind. The unnatural length of its arms, the way it seemed to unfold itself from the shadows. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the dense undergrowth, convinced I was being watched. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf, sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I didn't run. I walked fast and purposeful, back toward the trail marker, the feeling of unseen eyes boring into my back. That night, sleep was a stranger. I kept seeing that shape in the periphery of my vision, a dark blot against the familiar shadows of my room. The next morning, I dismissed it as an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night spooky stories. I mean, Austin isn't exactly the wild frontier, but a strange compulsion, a need for answers, drew me back to that same trail the next evening. I told myself I was being foolish, that I was just going to prove to myself there was nothing there. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The woods were beautiful, peaceful even. And for a while, I almost believed my own lie. I found the spot. The bushes were thick, just as I remembered. I cautiously pushed aside some branches. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing to suggest anything unusual had been there. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. See? Nothing. Just my mind playing tricks on me. As I turned to leave, a glint of something on the ground caught my eye. It was a small, crudely made fetish, woven from animal hair and small bones, tied together with what looked like dried sinew. A cold dread, colder than the night before, washed over me. This wasn't a random object. It felt like a warning, a marker. That's when I heard it, a voice. It was faint at first, carried on the breeze, a high-pitched, warbling cry. It sounded like a coyote, but it was wrong, distorted. The cry was answered by another, closer this time. It was a perfect imitation of a woman's scream, filled with terror. My blood ran cold. I knew with a certainty that defied logic that it wasn't a person. I scrambled back, tripping over a root, and my flashlight clattered to the ground. The beam spun wildly, illuminating the trees in frantic, dizzying strobes. And in one of those flashes, I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, no longer hiding. Taller than any man, impossibly thin, its skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, they glowed with a faint, predatory light. It didn't move, it just watched me. The screaming sound came again, but this time it was coming from the creature's direction, a perfect mimicry of my own terrified gasp. It was learning. It was toying with me. Panic gave me strength. I lunged for my flashlight and bolted. I didn't look back. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. Behind me, I could hear it. The heavy, thudding footsteps were keeping pace with me impossibly fast. It wasn't running like a human. It was loping on all fours, the sound of its claws scrabbling against rock and dirt. A low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest. It was punctuated by more coughing sounds, a dog's bark, a bird's call, and then, chillingly, a soft whisper that sounded exactly like my name. How could it know my name? The thought was so terrifying it almost made me stumble. I burst out of the woods and onto the asphalt of the parking lot. My car was a beacon of safety under the single flickering lamppost. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. The door clicked open and I threw myself inside, slamming and locking it in one motion. My heart was a jackhammer. I looked into the rearview mirror, my breath fogging the glass. At the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the light, the two glowing eyes stared back at me. They watched me for a long moment, unblinking, before melting back into the darkness. I drove away, tires squealing, and I didn't stop until the city lights of Austin surrounded me completely. I never went back to that trail. For weeks, I was jumpy, paranoid. Every sound at night made me flinch. I started hearing things. A faint scratching at my window on the third floor. A whisper on the wind that sounded like my name. I even saw it once, or I think I did. A tall, gaunt figure standing across the street, motionless under a streetlight, just watching my apartment. When I blinked, it was gone. Some people say skinwalkers are just legends, old stories to scare people, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. It wasn't a trick of the light, and it wasn't my imagination. Something ancient and malevolent lives in those woods on the edge of the city. It watches, it learns, and it waits. And sometimes, when the night is too quiet and the shadows are too deep, I can still feel its eyes on me. I moved out of Austin a month later. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still looking for me, that it remembered my face, my scent, my fear. I don't hike at night anymore. I don't even like being near the woods after dark, because I know that what you see in the bushes might just see you back, and it might decide to follow you home. Thanks for tuning in. If you've ever had a similar experience, share it in the comments below. Stay safe out there, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the dark.
The Appalachian Trail had always been a dream of mine, a pilgrimage of sorts. After weeks of rugged terrain and breathtaking vistas, I found a small, rustic hostel tucked away in a valley, a welcome sight for my weary legs. The place was cozy, filled with fellow hikers, sharing stories and a warm meal. I was assigned a top bunk in a room with 3 other people. The guy in the bunk below me, a quiet, lanky fellow named He had been there for a couple of days, nursing a sprained ankle. He seemed nice enough, though he kept to himself, mostly just reading a tattered paperback. The other 2 were a cheerful couple from Germany who were already asleep when I climbed into my bunk. I was exhausted, the kind of deep, bone-weary tired you only get from days on the trail. As I drifted off, I heard a soft voice from the bunk below. "Good night, honey. Sleep well." I froze. My entire body went rigid. It was my mom's voice. Not just similar to it, but exactly her voice, the same gentle cadence, the same loving tone she'd used to tuck me in every night as a kid. But my mom was over 1,000 miles away, sound asleep in her own bed. My heart started hammering against my ribs. It had to be a dream, I told myself. I was just overtired, my mind playing tricks on me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force myself to sleep, to escape the chilling echo of that voice. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the old wooden hostel, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the steady breathing of the German couple and the unnervingly silent bunk below me. Eventually, I must have drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, because I was startled awake by a soft scratching sound. It was coming from below. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. It sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across the wooden bed frame. My blood ran cold. I strained my ears, trying to place the sound. Was it Izan? Was he just restless because of his ankle? I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but a primal fear had taken root in my gut. The scratching stopped, and a moment later, I heard a low, guttural whisper. It was too muffled to make out the words. A string of harsh, unfamiliar sounds that made the hair on my arm stand up. It definitely wasn't English. It wasn't German either. It sounded ancient, something that didn't belong in the modern world. My breath caught in my throat. I had to see what was going on. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, I leaned over the edge of my bunk, peering down into the darkness below. The room was bathed in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, casting long, distorted shadows. Ethan's bunk was empty. The sheets were thrown back, but he was gone. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would wake the entire room. Where could he have gone? The bathroom. Maybe he stepped outside for some air. But then, I saw it. The window on the far side of the room, the one that was supposed to be latched shut, was wide open. A cold night breeze was drifting in, making the thin curtains dance like ghostly figures. A wave of pure terror washed over me. He hadn't used the door. I pulled back into my bunk, my mind racing. Nothing made sense. The voice, the scratching, the open window. It was all wrong. I remembered the old tales I'd read about the Appalachian Mountains. Whispers of strange creatures that roamed the forests. Beings that could mimic human voices. Skinwalkers. I'd always dismissed them as campfire stories. Folklore meant to scare tourists. But lying there, in the dead of night, with an empty bunk below me, and my mother's voice still echoing in my mind, the stories felt horrifyingly real. I didn't dare move. I just lay there, wrapped in my sleeping bag like a cocoon, pretending to be asleep. Every muscle tensed. I listened for any sound of his return, my ears straining against the silence. Or pass it. The first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, painting the room in shades of gray. Just as I started to think maybe I had imagined it all, a dark shape appeared at the open window. It was impossibly tall and thin, a contorted silhouette against the pre-dawn light. It moved with a fluid, au natural grace, folding itself through the window frame with a series of quiet, sickening cracks, like bones being reset. It wasn't human. It was too long, too gaunt, its limbs moving at angles that were just wrong. It landed silently on the floor and then, with a final, horrifying shudder, it seemed contract. The long limbs shortened, the gaunt frame filled out, and in the dim light, the shape resolved itself into the familiar form of Ethan. He quietly crossed the room and slipped back into his bunk as if he'd never left. I didn't breathe. Primera, Cudient. I had just watched something monstrous transform into the man sleeping a few feet below me. The quiet, unassuming hiker with the sprained ankle. Was the ankle even real? Or was it just part of the disguise? The sun was rising now, and the birds began to sing their morning chorus. A cheerful sound that felt completely alien to the horror I had just witnessed. Soon, the German couple started to stir. I heard Ethan move below me, a soft groan as if he was just waking up. "Morning?" he said, his voice completely normal. Friendly, even I couldn't answer. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear. I had to get out. I had to get away from him, from this place. Carefully, I climbed down from my bunk, avoiding eye contact with Ethan. I grabbed my pack, shoving my gear inside with trembling hands. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice casual. I could feel his eyes on me. He just nodded, mumbling something about getting an early start. "All right," he said. "Be safe out there." He smiled, a perfectly normal, friendly smile. But his eyes, there was something in his eyes. A flicker of ancient, knowing intelligence that wasn't human. As I turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice dropping to that same soft whisper from the night before. "Say hi to your mom for me." I didn't look back. I practically ran out of the hostel and didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky. I never finished the trail. Some trails aren't meant to be finished. I went home, and every time my mom says goodnight, a part of me still freezes, waiting for the wrong voice to answer back from the darkness. Thanks for listening, and please, be careful who you share a room with. Follow for more stories. The desert has a way of playing tricks on you, especially at night. The vast, empty landscape under a blanket of stars can make you feel like the last person on Earth. That's how I felt. Anyway, I'm working the night shift as a security guard at the brand new Sylvista solar farm. Miles of shimmering glass panels, soaking up moonlight instead of sun, spread out before me like a silent, frozen ocean. It was my third week on the job, and the isolation was starting to get to me. The only company I had was the crackle of the radio and the low hum of the inverters. My patrol route was simple. A slow drive around the perimeter fence in a beat-up golf cart, then a walk through the central access corridors. For the first couple of weeks, the most exciting thing that happened was a coyote trotting along the fence line, its eyes glowing in my flashlight beam. But then, things started to get strange. It began with the sounds. At first, it was just a faint scratching noise coming from just beyond the chain link fence. I'd stop the cart, shine my powerful flashlight into the darkness, and see nothing but sagebrush and sand. I wrote it off as a rabbit or some other desert creature. But the sound grew more persistent, more deliberate. It wasn't the frantic scratching of a small animal. It was a slow, rhythmic scrape. Scrape. Scrape, like a long nail being dragged against metal. One night, the scraping was so loud I couldn't ignore it. I killed the engine of the cart and listened. It was coming from the north fence, the most remote section of the farm. I grabbed my heavy-duty maglite and walked toward the sound, my boots crunching on the gravel. The air was dead still, and the scraping echoed in the silence. As I got closer, it stopped abruptly. I swept the beam of my light across the fence, and my heart jumped into my throat. There, about 7 feet up the chain link, were 3 long, deep gouges in the metal. They were fresh. The metal glinted where the coating had been torn away. No coyote could do that. A mountain lion? Maybe? But we were too far from the mountains. I felt a cold, not tighten in my stomach. The next night, I was extra vigilant. I drove my patrol twice as slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness. The farm was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual chirping of crickets was gone. As I passed the north fence, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. A shape, silhouetted against the moonlit horizon, was standing just outside the fence. It was tall, unnaturally so, and impossibly thin. It stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from shadow. I fumbled for my radio, my hand shaking. Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I have a possible trespasser at the north perimeter. The radio crackled back to life. Unit 3, can you describe the individual? I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It's tall, very tall, and thin. It's not moving. My voice was barely a whisper. I raised my flashlight, my thumb hovering over the switch. I hesitated. Some primal part of my brain was screaming at me not to. Don't let it see you. Don't let it know you're here. But my job was to secure the site. I had to. I flicked on the light. The beam cut through the darkness and hit the figure, and I swear, what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. It wasn't a person. Its limbs were too long, bent at angles that were just wrong. It was covered in patchy, dark fur, but its face was horrifyingly bare, like stretched, leathery skin over a skull. But the eyes were the worst. They weren't animal eyes. They were very dark, intelligent, and filled with a chilling, ancient hatred. And they were staring right at me. It didn't flinch in the bright light. Instead, its head tilted, and a sound came from it that wasn't a growl or a roar, but something far more terrifying. It was a mimicry of a human voice, but distorted, like a recording played backward. It was a gurgling, raspy whisper that seemed to echo inside my own head. Suddenly, it moved. It dropped to all fours with a speed that defied physics and scurried along the fence line, its long limbs carrying it with a grotesque spider-like grace. It was so fast, it was just a blur of motion. I scrambled back into the golf cart, jammed the key in, and floored it. The little electric motor whined in protest as I sped away, not daring to look back. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the main security shack, jumping at every shadow, every hum of the machinery. I reported a large, unidentified animal, but I knew they wouldn't believe the truth. They sent a dash shift guy out to check the fence. He found nothing. No tracks, no fur, Not even the scratches I'd seen the night before. Te were a host, gone. Everyone thought I was seeing things, a combination of fatigue and the desert playing tricks on my mind. But I knew what I saw, and it wasn't done with me. A few nights later, the radio started acting up. It wasn't static, it was voices. Faint, whispering voices mixed in with the crackle. At first, I couldn't make them out. Then, I heard it clearly, my name. It was whispering my name. Yok. It hissed, the voice thin and reedy. Then, another voice joined in, a perfect imitation of my supervisor, Dave Shake. Report to the central corridor. We have a panel malfunction. My blood ran cold. Dave was at home, asleep. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch. Repeat last. Transmission. Static. That's all I got back. Pure, hissing static. I knew it was a trap. Whatever that thing was, it was trying to lure me out from the relative safety of the cart. I stayed put, my eyes darting nervously towards the endless rows of solar panels. That's when I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap. Tap. Tap, tap. I slowly looked up at the roof of the golf cart. Tap. My breath hitched in my chest. I was frozen, too terrified to move, too terrified to even breathe. The tapping stopped. A low, guttural chuckle echoed in the cart, seeming to come from all around me at once. Then, a long, spindly finger, tipped with a blackened nail, curled slowly around the edge of the windshield, right in front of my face. I screamed. I didn't even think. I threw the cart into reverse and slammed my foot on the accelerator. The cart shot backward, and I heard a terrible shriek from the roof as the thing was thrown off. I cranked the wheel, spun the cart around, and drove like a madman back to the main gate, not stopping, not looking back. I burst into the security shack, locked the door, and shoved a desk against it. The rest of the night was torment. It toyed with me. I heard it running on the roof of the shack. I heard it whispering my name from the vents. It mimicked the sound of a crying woman, then the bark of a dog, then the voice of my own mother, calling for me to come outside. Every sound was designed to unnerve me, to break me. When the first rays of dawn finally broke over the horizon, the sound stopped. Who's like that silence? I waited until the sun was fully up before I dared to venture outside. There were no tracks, no sign of anything. It was as if the whole night had been a terrible nightmare. I quit that day. I handed in my keys, gave a flimsy excuse about a family emergency, and drove away from that solar farm without ever looking back. I moved out of that town, far away from the desert. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think I can hear it. A faint scratching at the window, a distorted whisper on the wind, calling my name. I know it remembers me, and I know that one day, it might come looking for me again. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some things, out there in the dark, are best left alone. Thanks for tuning in. If you have a story you'd like to share, you know where to find me. Until next time, stay safe, and be careful what you look for in the dark. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Tales from the Shadows. The call came in just after midnight. Another routine maintenance check on a remote oil field. But this one felt different from the start. The dispatcher's voice was strained, mentioning something about strange reports from the area, unusual animal sightings, equipment malfunctioning in bizarre ways. My partner, Dave, just laughed it off. He was a seasoned veteran of the oil fields, a man who believed in sweat, steel, and nothing else. I was younger, newer to the job, and maybe a little more open to the unexplained. The drive out was long and silent, the darkness of the West Texas plains swallowing our headlights. When we finally arrived, the silence was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was heavy, watchful. The massive pump jacks stood like skeletal giants against the starry sky, but their usual rhythmic groaning was gone. They were all dead still. We split up to cover more ground. Dave took the northern sector, and I started my checks on the southern pumps. The air was cold, but it was a dry, unnatural chill that seemed to seep right into my bones. As I approached the third pump jack, my flashlight beam caught something on the metal ladder. It looked like deep gouges, almost like something with enormous claws had tried to climb it. I ran my fingers over the marks. They were fresh. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, carried on the wind. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. I froze, trying to place the direction. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I radioed Dave. "Dave, you hearing anything weird over there?" His reply was staticky, but I could make out his usual gruff tone. "Just the wind. Kid, get back to work." But it wasn't the wind. The tapping grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like fingernails on steel. I swept my flashlight across the dark expanse of the field, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. Nothing. Just the silent, looming machinery. I tried to focus on my checklist, my hands fumbling with the gauges. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I felt eyes on me from the darkness, a primal, predatory gaze that made the hair on my arms stand up. I called Dave again, my voice trembling slightly this time. "Dave, seriously, there's something out here. I'm hearing things." Silence, then a burst of static. ... "Behind you." The radio cut out. A cold dread washed over me. I whipped around, my light cutting a frantic arc through the night. Nothing. Just empty, dusty ground. My blood ran cold. Was he messing with me? Dave wasn't the type for jokes, especially not on the job. "Dave, Dave, come in." "That's not funny," only static answered. Panic began to set in. I abandoned my checks and started running towards the northern sector, calling his name. The tapping sound started again, closer this time, faster. It was keeping pace with me. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my boots crunching on the gravel path. Up ahead, I saw the beam of a flashlight on the ground, pointing towards a large storage tank. It was Dave's. As I got closer, I saw his toolkit lying scattered beside it, but there was no sign of him. I grabbed his flashlight and called his name again, my voice cracking. The only reply was an echo in that relentless tapping sound, which now seemed to be coming from on top of the storage tank. I slowly raised my light, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. And that's when I saw it. Perched on the edge of the tank, silhouetted against the moon, was a figure. It was gaunt, unnaturally long-limbed, and crouched like an animal ready to pounce. It wasn't human. Its head turned, and its eyes glowed with a faint, predatory light, like a coyote's, but filled with a terrifying intelligence. It was watching me. The thing slowly, deliberately, raised a long, bony hand and tapped a single finger against the metal tank. Tap, 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 tap. Then, it spoke, and the voice that came out of it was a perfect imitation of Dave's. "Just the wind, kid." My mind screamed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature tilted its head, a grotesque parody of curiosity, and spoke again, this time mimicking the dispatcher's strained voice from the phone call. Unusual animal sightings. It was replaying everything. The thing unfolded itself from its crouch, standing to a height that was impossibly tall. Its joints cracked and popped with an unnatural sound as it straightened, its form shifting and elongating in the dim light. It took a step towards the edge of the tank, its movements jerky and wrong, like a puppet being controlled by an unseen hand. It was toying with me, savoring my fear. I finally broke free from my paralysis. I turned and ran, not back to the truck, but towards the only place I could think of, the small, reinforced control shed in the center of the field. I could hear it drop from the tank with a heavy thud, and then the sound of its footsteps behind me. They weren't human footsteps. They were heavy, fast, and had a strange, dragging quality. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The thing was running on all fours, its body contorted into a nightmarish, canine form, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I've never run so fast in my life. The shed seemed a mile away, The creature was getting closer. I could hear its breathing now, a ragged, guttural sound that was filled with hunger. I threw myself against the steel door of the shed, fumbling with the handle. ETH was locked. My heart sank. I was trapped. I braced myself for the impact, for the claws I knew were about to tear into me. Then I remembered the emergency keypad. My fingers, slick with sweat, flew over the numbers. Praying I remembered the code. The lock clicked open just as the creature slammed into the door behind me. I scrambled inside, throwing my whole weight against the door to shut it. The thing on the other side threw itself against the steel again and again, the impacts shaking the entire small building. A high-pitched shriek of pure rage and frustration echoed from outside, a sound that will haunt my nightmares forever. Then, the pounding stopped. Silence returned, just as heavy and watchful as before, but I knew it was still out there, waiting. Through the small, reinforced window, I could see it pacing back and forth, its form constantly shifting, melting from a wolf-like shape to something vaguely human and back again. And then it started talking. It used Dave's voice, begging me to open the door, telling me he was hurt. It used my mother's voice, crying, asking why I wouldn't help her. It cycled through voices it had no way of knowing, voices from my past, twisting my memories into weapons against me. I huddled in the corner, covering my ears, trying to block out the psychological torment. I stayed in that shed until the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. As the sun came up, the creature let out one last, frustrated scream and melted back into the shadows of the plains. When the recovery team found me, they found Dave's truck, his tools, but not him. They dismissed my story as a stress-induced hallucination. But I know what I saw. I quit my job that day. I left West Texas and never looked back. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows just right, I can almost hear a faint tapping sound, and I know that thing is still out there, in the vast, dark emptiness of the oil fields, waiting. It can mimic any voice, any sound, but the one thing it can't fake is the soulless hunger in its eyes. So if you're ever out in the middle of nowhere and you hear a familiar voice call your name from the darkness, don't answer. Just run. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to follow 4 more tailies from the shadows. Stay safe. The flickering neon sign of Diner's Delight was the only splash of color against the vast, inky blackness of the Arizona desert. I was on a long, lonely drive back home, and the promise of a hot meal and a cup of coffee was too tempting to ignore. The place was a classic roadside diner, the kind you see in old movies, with red vinyl booths and a long Formica countertop. There were only a handful of other people inside. A young couple huddled in a corner booth, whispering and giggling. A weary-looking trucker was hunched over his plate at the counter, and in the booth directly across from me sat 2 men, a father and son. I assumed they were locals, dressed in worn denim and plaid shirts, their faces weathered by the sun. They ate in complete silence, their movements slow and deliberate, almost unnervingly so. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Brenda, refilled my coffee and warned me about the storms that were rolling in. She said the power lines out here were unreliable. Hoost smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and looked out the window. The desert at night is a strange and beautiful thing, but it also holds a deep, ancient sense of unease. The air in the diner suddenly felt heavy, charged with static. The lights buzzed and flickered erratically, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. Then, with a final, apologetic pop, everything went dark. A collective gasp echoed through the small space. Brenda's voice cut through the blackness, reassuring us that she'd get the backup generator started. She fumbled around behind the counter, the clinking of metal telling us she was looking for a flashlight. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning outside, briefly illuminating the room in stark, ghostly white. During one of these flashes, my eyes instinctively darted to the booth across from me. The father and son were still there, but something was wrong. Their silhouettes were different, distorted, taller somehow, and their heads seemed elongated, their shoulders broader. It was just a split-second glimpse, a trick of the light and shadow. Premeta told myself. My heart started pounding anyway. I could hear the young couple murmuring nervously, and the trucker grunted in annoyance. The air grew thick and cold, carrying a strange, earthy smell, like damp soil and wet fur. It was a primal animal scent that had no business being inside a diner. Another flash of lightning, brighter this time, ripped through the darkness. I forced myself to look again. This time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't a trick of the light. The two men were no longer men. In the frozen, horrifying moment of the flash, I saw them. They were contorted, their bodies twisting and reshaping. Bones seemed to crack and pop, a sickening, wet sound that was barely audible over the storm. Their faces were stretching, their noses and mouths pulling forward into grotesque snouts. Their hands, which had been resting on the table, were now larger, darker, tipped with what looked like thick, dirty claws that scraped against the formica. I choked back a scream, my hand flying to my mouth. The darkness returned, and I was left with that horrific afterimage burned into my retina. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming, but no sound came out. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. These were the kinds of stories you heard whispered around campfires. Tales meant to scare tourists. They weren't supposed to happen in a brightly lit diner, right in front of you. The sound of Brenda fumbling with the generator suddenly felt very, very far away. The only sounds I could focus on were the wet, tearing noises coming from the booth across the aisle. A low, guttural growl slithered through the darkness, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest. It was a sound of pure malice, of ancient hunger. It came from their booth. I was frozen in my seat, paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like a physical weight pinning me down. I could hear a faint scratching sound, the scrape of claws on vinyl. They were moving. Another flash of lightning lit up the scene, and my blood ran cold. They were no longer in their booth. Two massive, canine-like figures stood in the aisle, their forms a nightmarish blend of man and beast. They were talgont, covered in patchy, dark fur. Their eyes glowed with a faint, predatory red light of their own, piercing the absolute darkness. They weren't looking at the couple or the trucker. They were looking directly at me. Their heads were low, their bodies tensed like predators about to spring. The smell was overpowering now, a stench of rot and wildness that filled my lungs and made me want to gag. Time seemed to slow down. Every beat of my heart was a drum thundering in my ears, counting down my final seconds. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that I was their prey. Then, just as one of the creatures took a step towards me, his claws clicking softly on the linoleum floor, the lights flickered back on. The backup generator roared to life, and the diner was bathed in a steady, humming glow. I blinked, my eyes watering from the sudden brightness, and they were gone. The booth across from me was empty. The plates were still there, half-eaten food, growing cold. But the father and son, the creatures, whatever they were, had vanished. It was as if they had dissolved into thin air. Brenda let out a sigh of relief. Finally. Sorry about that, folks, she called out cheerfully. The trucker grumbled something about the bill, and the young couple started talking again, their voices shaky but relieved. They hadn't seen it. None of them had seen it. I looked at Brenda, my eyes wide with terror, but she just smiled at me, oblivious. I tried to speak, to tell them what I saw, but my throat was tight, and the words wouldn't come out. My hands were shaken so violently that I spilled my coffee. My whole body trembled with the aftershock of the terror. I scrambled out of the booth, threw some cash on the table, more than enough to cover the bill, and practically ran out of the diner. I didn't say a word, didn't look back. The moment the cold night air hit my face, I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys. As I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life, my headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the desert scrub around the diner's parking lot. And that's when I saw them. For just a second, at the very edge of the light's reach, I saw two pairs of glowing red eyes staring back at me from the brush. They watched me, unblinking, before retreating back into the shadows of the desert. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away, the tires squealing on the asphalt. I didn't slow down 4 miles. I drove with my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting to see those lanky, horrifying figures loping after me on the empty highway. I never told anyone what I saw that night. Who would believe me? They'd say it was the storm, the stress of the long drive, my imagination running wild in the dark. But I know what I saw. I know that for a few terrifying minutes, I was trapped in the dark with something that wasn't human, and I know that they let me go. I still have nightmares about those glowing red eyes, about the sound of cracking bones and the smell of wet fur. Sometimes, when the lights flicker, I feel a jolt of that same icy fear, and I can't help but look around, just to make sure everyone is still who they appear to be. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more Tillies from the shadows. Stay safe out there. The rustling wasn't from the wind. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I'd lived in Tucson my whole life, and the sounds of the desert at night were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Coyotes yipping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the dry scuttling of some unseen creature in the underbrush. But this was different. This sound had an intelligence to it, a predatory patience that made the hair on my arms stand up. It all started a few weeks ago. My apartment overlooks a small community park, really just a patch of dusty land with a few mesquite trees, a swing set, and a couple of benches. It's not much, but it was my little slice of desert serenity. Lately though, serenity was the last word I'd use to describe it. It began with my dog, Buster. He's a fierce little terrier mix, but suddenly, he refused to go near the park after sundown. He'd plant his paws firmly on the pavement, whining and pulling back on his leash, his eyes fixed on the deepening shadows under the trees. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he smelled a javelina or a coyote, but then other strange things started happening. I'd hear scratching at my second-story window late at night. Impossible, I told myself. There's nothing out there but a sheer drop. Then came the whispers, faint, like the wind carrying a distant conversation, but the words were just on the edge of comprehension, mimicking voices I knew. One night I could have sworn I heard my mother calling my name, clear as day. The problem is, my mother lives 3 states away. When I called her, panicked, she was fast asleep. The real turning point happened last Tuesday. I was working late, and around 2 in the morning, I got up to stretch and looked out my window at the park. Under the dim orange glow of a single streetlight, I saw a figure. It was hunched over near the swing set, unnaturally tall and thin. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending at angles that just felt wrong. It was digging at the base of one of the swings, its movements jerky and frantic. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark, shifting silhouette. My blood ran cold. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture, but by the time I got the camera app open, it was gone, vanished into thin air. The next morning, I couldn't resist. I had to go see what it was doing. I took Buster with me, though he was practically trembling. We walked over to the swing set, and my heart hammered against my ribs. There, in the hard-packed dirt, were deep gouges, not from a shovel, but from something sharp, something more like claws. And nestled in the disturbed earth was a small, crudely made doll of twigs and twine, with a single strand of what looked disturbingly like my own reddish-brown hair woven into it. That's when the stories my Navajo grandmother used to tell me came flooding back. Stories she'd only whisper after dark, about beings that could wear the skins of animals, that could mimic human voices to lure you out into the night. They were masters of trickery, creatures of pure malice. Skinwalkers. I'd always dismissed them as old-world folklore, scary tales to keep kids in line. But standing there, staring at that effigy with my hair tied into it, I knew. Igas just knew. The whispers have gotten louder since then. They're not just outside my window anymore. Sometimes, I hear them from the other room. A faint imitation of my own voice, humming a tune I haven't thought of in years. My reflection in the mirror sometimes seems to lag a split second behind my movements. I've covered all the mirrors in my apartment now. I keep the blinds drawn tight, even during the day. The park across the street is no longer a place of peace. It's a stage, and I feel like I'm the main character in a play I never auditioned for. Last night was the worst. I was jolted awake by a sound from my living room. A soft, wet, tearing sound, followed by a low, guttural cough. It was the kind of cough a person makes when they're trying to dislodge something from their throat. I lay in bed, frozen, every muscle screaming at me to stay quiet. The coughing stopped, and then I heard it. Footsteps. But they weren't normal footsteps. It was a heavy, uneven gait, like something was struggling to walk upright. A dragging sound, then a soft thud against my bedroom door. It was testing the lock. I held my breath, listening. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise. Then, a voice, right outside my door. It was my voice, but not. It was distorted, raspy, like a poor recording. It whispered, "Let me in." I forgot my key, my own voice, twisted into a horrifying parody. I didn't answer. I just pulled the blankets over my head like a child, my heart threatening to explode. I stayed like that until the sun came up, until the first rays of light streamed through a crack in the blinds. When I finally got the courage to open my door, the apartment was empty. Everything was in its place, but on the floor, right in front of my bedroom door, was a single, large, muddy paw print. It wasn't from a coyote or a dog. It was too big, the shape all wrong, and scattered around it were several long, coarse black hairs. I don't know what to do. The police would think I'm crazy. Who do you call when a nightmare from ancient folklore decides to move in across the street? It's watching me. I know it is. From Dot Park. It wears the desert's darkness like a cloak, and it can wear a familiar voice like a mask. It wants to trade places. I've started noticing things about myself. A new scratch I don't remember getting. A fleeting taste of something metallic in my mouth. I find myself staring out at the park, even when I don't want to. It's like it's calling to me, pulling at something deep inside. This morning, I looked in the bathroom mirror before I had a chance to stop myself. For a horrifying second, my reflection grinned back at me. Its teeth just a little too long, its eyes a little too dark. I don't know how much longer I can keep it out. I don't know how much longer I'll be me. The sun is setting again over Tucson, and the shadows in the park are growing long, and I can hear it, starting again. The faint rustling in the trees. It knows I'm listening. It's waiting. Thanks for tuning in to my story. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, something ancient and unsettling in the night, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Stay safe out there. And whatever you do, don't listen to the whispers in the dark.